Good evening and welcome to this Tuesday, March 20th, 2018 meeting of the Raymore Planning and Zoning Commission. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let me remind commissioners, please make sure your microphone is lighted and speak into the mic for the record. And we'll call roll. Commissioner Wiggins.
Present.
Commissioner Armstrong.
Present.
Commissioner Bowie.
Here.
Commissioner Crane.
Present.
Commissioner Fizer.
Present.
Commissioner Meiske.
Present.
Okay. Commissioner Urquia. And Mayor Turnbow.
Here.
And Commissioner Faulkner is present. We do have a quorum. No personal appearances scheduled this evening. One item on consent agenda, acceptance of minutes from our March 6th, 2018 meeting. And unless there are any concerns about the minutes, I would entertain a motion either to approve consent agenda or accept minutes from March 6th as presented.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented.
Okay.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Meiske and second by Commissioner Wiggins to accept consent agenda as presented. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. 7 in favor. Any opposed? And one abstention, Mayor Turnbow. All right. All right, that takes us into old business, case 17036, which was tabled at our last meeting, and Mr. Zur.
From a procedural standpoint, I'd just like to make sure that you all make a motion to remove it from the table for further consideration this evening, second, and vote on that, and then we can discuss the parameters of the remainder of the report.
Good, thank you.
I'll make a motion to, sorry, was that it, to move it from the table to open it back up into discussion? Case 17036.
Second.
Was that Commissioner Meiske? Oh, Commissioner Bowie.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Wiggins, second by Commissioner Bowie to remove case 17036 from the table and reopen discussion. Any further discussion on that motion? All in favor, raise a hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8. 8 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. And I would think Mr. Grass or Mr. Cataret, probably we could start with a brief staff report on the case. Sound right?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Before you all this evening is a revised ordinance for the 27th Amendment to the Unified Development Code, which proposes to allow accessory dwelling units on all single-family residentially zoned lots throughout the city of Raymore. If you think back to our last meeting on March 6th, staff presented a preliminary or first draft of the accessory or the 27th Amendment, to which the commission shared several concerns, and we had a good discussion between the commission and staff, several questions, and like I said, really good discussion. Staff took that back to the drawing boards and tried to think about some of the questions that you all had brought up and to think about what we could change around the ordinance to make it perhaps a little bit stronger. So I'll kind of go through some of the major changes that we made. I won't make you sit through all of the details of the staff report that you heard at our last meeting. I'll just try and touch on some of the larger details and changes that were made. So as you'll remember from last time, the ordinance is broken out into 3 sections. The first revision proposes additions of definitions to the Unified Development Code that clarify language for detached accessory dwelling units versus attached. Nothing has changed to that since the last time you all had seen it at our last meeting. The second revision is in the use table in the Unified Development Code. Nothing has changed on that either. The major changes that took place were in Section 3 of the ordinance, which deal with some sizing requirements and things like that, depending on the zoning district in which the accessory dwelling unit would be located. So I'll kind of touch base on some of the concerns that you all brought up at our last meeting and go through and just kind of address what we have changed since then to kind of address some of those concerns. The first one was the size restrictions that staff had suggested to place on the accessory dwelling units. Currently, there are no hard size restrictions for accessory dwellings within our current code. The only restriction is that they cannot exceed the size of the existing structure on the lot. So staff kind of broke that out and looked at how that would affect the R1 single-family lots that are a little bit smaller in size versus what's currently permitted on a lot of the larger lots within the city of Raymore. And so what we've done is sort of broken the ordinance out into two sections. We've got the A and RE zoning districts, which like I said, are some of the larger zoning districts, the larger lots within the city. And then we've made a second category that those provisions only apply to the RR, R1A, R1, and R1.5 zoning districts. So depending on where you're at in the city, kind of what your property is zoned, some of these requirements will apply a little bit differently. So I'll start first with number 1 here. In the A and RE zoning districts, the following standards apply. Letter A and letter B remain the same from our last discussion. The major change that took place was letter C in that paragraph there. An accessory dwelling unit shall not exceed the total square footage of the principal building. And that just states that there's no limit on the size of the structure. It's all based on the existing size of your home. The accessory dwelling can be up to, if you have a 1,200 square foot home, you can build 1,199 square feet. That accessory dwelling just cannot exceed the size of your existing home on the lot. The next concern that was shared was one that dealt with emergency access, that we had good discussions with our police department and fire district on how they would respond to emergencies in these units if one were to occur. And they had strong kind of reservations about having a clearly marked path that would at least signify where that accessory dwelling unit would be located if it was a little bit further back on the property and wasn't as visible from the street. The original ordinance had language in there that would have required a paved connection. However, in the A and RE zoning districts, we don't require a paved driveway. So in hindsight, it wouldn't make much sense to have a paved sidewalk that connected to a gravel driveway. So we changed the language a little bit and just require a clearly marked and accessible pathway from the front of the lot to the front entrance of the accessory dwelling unit. So if you have a gravel driveway, a gravel path would suffice to meet that requirement. Like I said, it would look kind of odd and really make no sense to have a gravel driveway but up to a paved connection. So just kind of making some exceptions there for that zoning district. That's really the bulk of changes that really would affect the A and RE, some of the larger lots in the subdivisions in our city. As I mentioned, this ordinance was really geared towards R1 single-family lots that are a little bit smaller in nature, and coming up with some guidelines that would perhaps make accessory dwelling units fit in with some of those subdivisions a little bit better. So now I'll jump into section 2 of this ordinance here, and these provisions would apply to the RR, R1, R1A, and R1.5 zoning districts. Like I said, some of the smaller lots within the city. The major change that took place here, as you can see, A and B remain the same from the previous ordinance, and for the smaller zone lots, we've reinstituted that 60% of that size restriction. And as I'll get into in another handout here, you'll see kind of what that 60% looks like, and I'll kind of explain some of the other things within our code that will help regulate the size of accessory dwelling units on some of those smaller lots. So on the RR, R1A, R1, and R1.5 zoning districts, an accessory dwelling unit shall be limited to 60% of the total square footage of the principal building or 1,000 square feet, whichever of those is less. And like I said, you'll see in a later illustration kind of what that'll look like and how staff will be able to determine the maximum size for an accessory dwelling unit. Moving on to letters J and K within that section of the ordinance. Accessory dwelling units when located within letters I, J, and K within that ordinance, I'm sorry. Letter I states just a paved connection of at least 4 feet in width shall be provided from an existing sidewalk or driveway located in the front yard of the principal building to the entrance of the accessory dwelling unit. Again, just getting back to the availability and easy access for emergency services, just making sure they know where to go when an emergency arises. Letter J states that accessory dwelling units, when located in a fenced-in area, shall maintain a gated access of at least 4 feet in width to accommodate the paved connection. So just making sure that there's a access there. And then the last one, letter K, the entrance to the attached accessory dwelling unit shall be subordinate to that of the principal dwelling and be located only in the side or rear yard of the property. With smaller sized properties, you have a little bit less flexibility on where the unit can be placed. And obviously within our R1 single family districts, we kind of want to limit the appearance of a duplex. That's not necessarily the spirit of an R1 zoning district. So that restriction kind of just has some restrictions on where the front door can be placed just to limit the appearance, like I said, of a duplex versus a single family home in that zoning district. So those are the major changes that we've kind of instituted since our last discussion, and we think that based on our last discussion, this ordinance and this proposal is a little bit stronger than it was the first time around. So I thank you all for your discussion on that and a lot of the concerns that you had brought up. That would conclude the staff report at this time, but before we get into questions, I would like to kind of touch on the two handouts that are behind the staff report. And I'll kind of go through, when staff would receive an application for an accessory dwelling unit, what are the things that we would look at to determine whether or not that accessory dwelling unit is meeting the size requirements. What do they look at to determine how large they can build if a homeowner is looking at building an accessory dwelling unit. So the first one deals specifically with attached accessory dwelling units. The front of it just gives kind of an overview of where it can be built, and then a brief overview of the three different mechanisms in the code that will kind of dictate how large that accessory dwelling unit can be. So if you flip to the back, I've given two examples of your standard, one example being your standard 8,400 R1 single family lot, and the other one being a much larger 100,000 square foot lot. And you can see just based on the size of those lots, kind of the room that they have there to develop, the size of an accessory dwelling unit that can be built on that property differs substantially. So with your typical 8,400 square foot lot with a existing home of about 1,800, 1,600 square feet, under the maximum allowable lot coverage, which is a requirement that applies to all lots throughout the city of Raymore, for a R1 single family lot, that's typically 30%. So with an existing home of about 1,840 square feet, an accessory dwelling unit actually on that lot could only be built to a maximum size of 790 square feet. At that point, any larger than that, you'd be exceeding the 30% of maximum allowable lot coverage, and you would not be able to build any larger than that. So even though our proposed code language of 60% of the existing dwelling would allow for a 1,100 square foot lot, that would exceed the maximum building coverage for that zoning district. So it would automatically kick back to that smaller size. Whereas if you look at a much larger lot, like I said, a 109,000 square foot, 110 square foot lot with an existing home size of about 2,900, 3,000 square feet, 30% of that lot minus the existing home, you're still left with about 29,000 square feet left of buildable space. That's obviously a huge home, and under our current zoning code wouldn't be allowed because it wouldn't be able to exceed the size of the existing home. And then under our proposed code language, 60% of a 2,940 square foot home is about 1,764 square feet. So because that exceeds the 1,000 square foot limit, it would revert back to a maximum size of 1,000 square feet. So you can see it kind of depends, like I said, based on the location throughout the city, the size of the lot, and a lot of those restrictions and guidelines that we had originally proposed were geared towards some of those smaller lots that have a lot less flexibility in where those units can be built. As far as detached accessory dwelling units, which you'll see on the next page, same situation. Obviously, on your smaller R1 lots, you have a lot less flexibility. But if you flick to the back of that page there, a detached accessory dwelling unit, again on a 8,400 square foot lot with a existing home size of about 1,840 square feet, the maximum allowable lot coverage would allow for a accessory dwelling unit to be about 790 square feet. However, within our code, we also have a provision that deals with the maximum allowable lot coverage specifically for accessory buildings, and that is 8% of the lot coverage. So of that 8%, that's about 701 square feet. So a detached accessory dwelling unit on that property would be limited to that 701 square feet, because that would be the limit for the 8% for accessory dwelling units on a lot. And then again, on a much larger lot with a 109,000 square feet with 2,940 square foot home, like I said, the 30% maximum allowable lot coverage would allow for the 29,000 very, very large accessory dwelling unit. Under the maximum allowable lot coverage on that lot, you could build up to 8,720 square feet, again, a very, very large home. And then under our proposed code language, the 60% of the existing home size would get you to about 1,764 square feet. So again, you would be limited to that 1,000 square foot size. So on the majority of our larger lots within the city, they're going to be maxed out at that that 1,000 square foot limit. Very rarely are you going to find a larger lot that's going to be limited to any less than that, just because you've got so much more flexibility and room to work with as far as accessory dwellings are concerned. So hopefully these illustrations, I didn't really get a chance to too deep into these at our last meeting, but hopefully those kind of help speak to some more of your concerns if you were to have any. And like I said, hopefully some of the changes that we made since our last meeting have addressed the majority of the concerns that you all shared with us at our last meeting. But if you have any additional questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them for you. Yes, sir.
Commissioner Wiggins.
Thank you. Just on the proposed language changes, sections 1 and then 2 under, I guess it would be section under E. Just curious, B on both of them. The first one ends in or a detached building. The second one ends in or a detached structure. I assume those are obviously interchangeable words, but I just was curious if there was if that was just an accident or if there's an intentional differentiation between each of those. I assume it's the same.
I believe that might have been an oversight. We had played with some of the wording as far as primary dwelling, principal dwelling, structure, building. So that may have been just an oversight on staff side, but it's certainly something that we can clean up and make consistent.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure because I didn't know if there was a definition difference between the two and that could be an issue or not. So I just want to point that out. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Good catch.
I don't have an issue one way or the other. I don't have an issue one way or the other.
Sure, just as long as they're consistent between the two.
Yeah, okay. Commissioner Arcade, comment? No? Okay.
Oh, no, actually I did. On the 4-foot wide sidewalk, I understand the reasoning behind that size, but I'm trying to think, I know the sidewalk that leads up to my house isn't 4 feet wide. So I'm just curious why we would make him have to make a larger sidewalk for an accessory dwelling as opposed to my own front door.
That was really based, so the standard width for a sidewalk on a residential lot is 4 feet. So it was just assumed that that would be similar for your driveway or a sidewalk. But the reasoning behind that was for emergency access. We would have at least the 4 feet to accommodate emergency service staff, any equipment they would need to bring into the home if necessary, and 4 feet was kind of the minimum width that would allow that.
So do we think that the existing sidewalk was probably grandfathered?
I don't believe there's any requirements in our code that would limit the size of a sidewalk to your home from your driveway. Our requirements really only apply to sidewalks that are within the right-of-way.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Armstrong.
Thank you. Just to make sure I'm interpreting this correctly, the size limits that you were quoting then would not apply to the A and RE zoned properties, the 1,000 square foot maximum?
Correct. The only restrictions that would apply to those lots would be that it cannot exceed the size of the existing home on the lot.
And the 8% total square footage?
The 8% would still apply to that because that's still a requirement for accessory structures.
Okay.
But like I said, with that 8%, with a much larger lot, you've got a lot more flexibility. You would still be above the 1,000 square foot, I would believe.
Commissioner Urquia.
I noticed on your second page for the detached one, on the back, on the larger lot, there appears to be already a detached little building there off to the side. Does that mean you can have more than one?
You can have more than one accessory structure on your property, but under the code, you would only be allowed one accessory dwelling unit.
Okay.
And any calculations that were, say if this homeowner came in and submitted an application, the overall, that 8% for accessory dwelling units, that existing unit would be factored into that as well. So you'd have to subtract out the size of whatever the size is of that existing accessory structure on the property.
And would that be clear to me if I was looking at this little sample and saying, okay, good, I don't have to worry about counting that because it doesn't look like it takes that into account in your total?
It's not stated specifically in here. Within our Unified Development Code, it is stated in there that you can have multiple accessory structures on the property, but the sum of those accessory structures can't exceed the 8%.
Okay, but do you think I might find that confusing with your second little building there? Because it says, your little thing that says attached unit of this would allow a limit size of 1,000 square feet, but it doesn't say taking into consideration the size of your other dwelling or your other detached.
Sure, so just adding some language that says taking into consideration any other existing accessory structures that are on the property.
I think that'd be important because I'm looking at this thinking, okay, I can build another 1,000-foot accessory dwelling without having to worry about my other little shed or whatever it is there.
Well, I think if that's just I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. You're
If that's just a lawnmower building, then it's not a dwelling unit, it's just a storage unit. And so as long, I mean, if that's let's hypothetically say that's a 10-acre lot, 8% is going to be well over, so you can have 1,000, so I said, it's not a
Well, but-
dwelling unit, it's just a structure.
I'm with you.
So as long as it's, because this down here specifically states a detached accessory dwelling unit
Right.
in the little,
Right, in the little
orange
box.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, okay, and I get what you're saying, but let's just say that for the sake of argument, that the maximum allowable coverage was 1,000 square feet, and I have a shed for my lawnmower, I would have to subtract that out of the size of my accessory dwelling, correct? Because it can't exceed 8%.
Right, if the sum of those two buildings exceeds the maximum allowable coverage, you would have to subtract out the, whatever size of that existing accessory structure would be.
Okay.
So I agree, I think adding some clarifying language of, the sum of all accessory structures on the lot, which is stated in our accessory, or in our UDC, but I think having some maybe language on the application itself might be,
I think that'd
might be
be a
useful as
lot
well.
more, because especially if I'm a visual guy, I'd be like, oh, I'm good. And then, like, oh, no. So, yeah, okay, sorry.
All right. Yeah. Commissioner Wiggins.
Thank you. I apologize if this had ever been addressed before I came on the commission, but hypothetically, I'm building a 50 by 100 foot barn. That's 5,000 square feet. And let's say it's still within my 8%. Well, I guess actually, maybe I just answered my own question in my head. If half of it, if you wanted to make an accessory dwelling unit and part of it in the back half of it be implement storage, but let's say, but I guess if I had a lot big enough that would support a building that size, I would be in an okay spot where it doesn't matter, so never mind.
Okay. Commissioner Armstrong.
Forgive my lack of engineering background, but for those A and RE residences where the potential for the structure size to be larger, we've allowed that they can use the existing sanitary sewage disposal. Are there any restrictions? If you have a 1,200 or a 1,500 foot structure, or more than one residences, is there any potential for that to cause a problem if they're hooking into the existing sewage or utilities? And if so, where would that be addressed?
So that would really be taken care of and addressed upon their initial application when they submitted their drawings and everything to staff for review. One of the things we would look at would be the capacity of their existing sanitary and water system on their property. And if the drawings that they propose, if the existing system can handle that, then they're okay to hook up to their existing system. It's only if what they've proposed to add exceeds the capacity of whatever system is already on their lot. At that point, they would have to add an additional connection separate from the primary structure on the lot.
Commissioner Meiske.
I have a question. The detached drawing here shows the detached at the back of the property. And where would you put the 4-foot sidewalk to gain access to that?
So for your smaller R1 lots, you're really only limited to the 2 side yards that you have around your property.
Right.
And for the most part, generally the side yard setback for a home is anywhere between 10, 15, as small as 7.5 feet. So for the most part, you're going to have adequate room in between there to add the sidewalk. In this case, it would either be they could go around either side of the home. They could. Okay. It would make more sense to go from the driveway around the east side of the property in this case.
I didn't know if there was any code that prohibited, like, concrete being so many feet from a property line. So, and I know some places are pretty narrow, like you said, 7.5 feet.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
But there's no limitations on
No,
you.
our code allows a driveway or sidewalk to go up to the property line.
That's fine then. Thank you.
Mr. Gress, am I correct that I'll try to get the right word here, the clearly marked and accessible connection wouldn't necessarily have to be poured concrete. It could be pervious pavers or some other mechanism besides impervious concrete?
Yes,
Yeah.
that is correct.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions?
Quick question.
Okay.
Before we make a move to approve this, are we going to address his issue that he mentioned earlier? Are we going to address that in the language somewhere?
So I'm sorry, I may have lost it.
You're talking about the total, you're just going to add that to your little
Right, right.
Yeah.
drawing sheet?
We could, but these handouts really aren't directly tied to the ordinance itself. These are more informational.
Okay.
And the correction that you suggested, I think, would best be fit in the application itself rather than the actual
But I
ordinance.
think we should, Commissioner Bowie, I think we should just casually address the distinction. I think it's in 2B on page 5, where it used the term detached structure. It seems like that one should be detached building to be consistent with the others.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think your point's well taken. Commissioner Armstrong, did you have a question?
Apologies. I see on 2C, you retained the 1,000 square foot max. And I wasn't clear in the discussion at the last meeting where that came from. Is there something that it speaks to? I understand the need to keep a cap on it as an accessory dwelling, but why the 1,000 foot as opposed to leaving it just 60% of the total square footage of the principal?
Good question. So that was put in there to provide a little bit more of an exception for some of the larger R1 lots. Generally, you're not going to find an existing home that's any larger than 1,200 or 1,300 square feet. So that 1,000 square feet still keeps it smaller than the existing structure on some of those larger lots, making it still truly an accessory building. But then again, on some of those larger R1 lots, you still have some flexible room to go a little bit above that, maybe 700 square foot limit that you would find on an 8,400 square foot lot. And 1,000 square foot, we did a lot of research on some other communities that have these ordinances already adopted. And 1,000 square foot was typically kind of what we found, 1,000 or 1,200. And I also had some discussions with our building inspector on, what's the minimum size for maybe a 1 to 2 bedroom home that you could have 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a kitchen. And generally 1,000 square feet was really the smallest that you could go to really get that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Apologies. So am I understanding correctly? You're saying that this is meant to give the maximum of either 60% of the principal structure or 1,000, whichever is larger?
No.
It would be whichever is less of those two.
Okay.
And as you'll see on some of those drawings, really on the smaller R1 lots, you're really never going to get above 600, 700 square feet, mostly because the 30% maximum lot coverage, that's going to be really the deciding factor on how large that can go. And based on the lot sizes, the typical lot sizes that we have here in Raymore and the size homes that we build, any more than 700 or 750 square feet is going to take you above that maximum allowable lot coverage. It's not really until you get to some of those 100,000 square foot lots where that 1,000 square foot maximum really becomes relevant.
Any other comments? Commissioner Armstrong.
Apologies. The need for the entryway to be in the sides or back, my understanding from the last discussion was that to avoid the appearance of a duplex. Is there any other rationale for that?
Not specifically. Like I said, the spirit of the R1 single-family district generally isn't to have multiple dwellings on a lot. You wouldn't really expect to see that moving into a home. So we kind of placed that in there to have sort of a safeguard against other neighbors in the neighborhood that might not expect to have a duplex next to their home. So having that entrance be a little bit less visible and a less obvious, a little subordinate to the primary entrance to the structure, just helps alleviate some of those concerns of having 2 dwellings on a single-family lot versus 1.
I think in part we are already addressing that by keeping the size to an accessory size. It's smaller than the primary residence, and my concern would be accessing it then for emergency personnel. You're mandating that they not have rapid access from the street.
Another thing to think about is that a lot of the homes that we build here are already built up to the front yard setback line, so there's really not a whole lot of addition to a home that can take place in the front yard. So the only place that really makes sense to add on to your home on a single-family lot would be in their rear yard, or in some special cases, maybe the side yard. So in a lot of cases, it really wouldn't make a lot of sense to have the front door in the front yard anyway, because you would really, on an existing home, that would be connecting to, the dining room or a computer room or something of that. I don't know the layout of all the homes in the city, but generally you see some more of those public type rooms in the front of the home versus the bedrooms that are typically located towards the rear of the home. So with that, you just have a lot more flexibility to add on addition to your home if you'd like, or if you would like to finish your basement, that's going to be, the entrance to that is more than likely going to be in your rear yard anyway. So to an extent, I think that will be a little bit self-regulating anyway, but for some of the larger R1 lots that you have, where you might have a little more flexibility to have an addition in your front yard, having that requirement just, like I said, has that safeguard to protect the appearance of a single-family home from appearing as a duplex, if that makes sense.
Are we ready for a motion?
I think I want to give it a
Would you
shot.
like to find out?
You gonna give it a shot?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot.
All right, go ahead.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion that Raymore Planning and Zoning Commission approve staff proposed findings of facts, and approve case number 17036, 27th Amendment to the UDC, accessory dwelling units, subject to implementation of the consistent language between the two sections.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. I got to ask a quick question. So I may just not have heard the word I was looking for, but I think what we're doing on this case is accepting staff proposed findings of fact and recommending approval to City Council. Commissioner Bowie, did I hear recommend approval to City Council?
You didn't, no.
Could-
But I can say it again.
Could you restate that?
Sure. Make a motion that the Planning and Zoning Commission, City of Raymore, approve staff proposed findings of facts and recommend case number 17036, 27th Amendment to the UDC, accessory dwelling units, to City Council with the implementation of consistent language between numbers 1 and 2.
And I will second that motion.
Okay. Mr. Zer, sound right to you? Okay. I'll see if I can repeat it halfway accurately now. So, motion by Commissioner Bowie, second by Commissioner Kia, to accept staff proposed findings of fact, forward case 17036, 27th Amendment to the UDC to City Council with a recommendation of approval. I cheated, sorry. I just read it out of the notes. Sound right? Okay, is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, sorry, this is throwing me off. I've got 9 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. And let me note for the record that Commissioner Kia arrived at 7:08 p.m., which was a very long time ago. My apologies.
My apologies. I had a soccer practice that ran a little long.
Well, I meant to acknowledge that earlier, but at any rate, so the vote is 9 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. That concludes case 17036 and takes us along to, okay, so the next item is new business commissioner training, primarily focused on new commissioners, which might be said to be a commissioner who's not attended this training previously and has not been part of the commission for more than a year. Sound about right, Mr. Zer?
That's about right.
But you're more than willing to stay. So I think the proposal was that we'll actually adjourn the formal business meeting, move to more comfortable spot for discussion, or?
Can I alter that for you as part of this discussion?
Of course you
I
may.
realized during the course of sitting here that we would not be able to have any of that discussion videoed for
Yeah.
purposes of public consumption at this
Right.
point. In light of that, if you would like to potentially motion to move new business to the bottom of the agenda.
Sure.
And then cover your city council report, your staff report, your public comment,
Yes.
and commission member comment. That way,
Absolutely.
individuals who perhaps have time constraints this evening or would need to leave, or those individuals who have heard this commissioner training at least, I think, Commissioner Crane, 3 or 4 times.
Well, the only thing,
May have the ability to leave while we still would be able to adjourn at the
so
conclusion.
Mr. Zur, I'm perfectly happy to stay in chambers and videotape. I just want to make sure that we still have enough commissioners to
Adjourn.
pass a motion to adjourn before we move on to commissioner training. Is that good?
That'd be good.
Okay.
And then, of course, we're going to motion to have the agenda item moved to the bottom, I would like.
You know,
if
I
that's what you're
usually
going
feel like I can do that, but if you think I need a motion to do that, let's,
to do. Thank you.
I move we adjust the agenda to shift commissioner training to the bottom of the agenda after adjournment.
Second.
Pardon? Okay, how am I going to get a motion to adjourn passed if part of the commission has left?
Well,
We'd still have
we
quorum.
would still have, hopefully, I would hope that we will still have 5 individuals total
Okay,
present.
I was not betting on that, but we'll take our chance. I'll follow your advice and we'll take our chances.
Either way, whoever is left can adjourn the meeting, I would say.
Okay.
We're not taking an action for purposes of
Can only
continuing.
leave based on seniority.
There you go. Okay, you're covered. All right, so I move that we adjust the agenda to shift commissioner training to happen immediately prior to adjournment.
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Meiske. If there's no further discussion on that, all those in favor, raise a hand, please. And I think I see 9 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. So, Commissioner training is now moved down, and Mr. Zur, if you would, we'd love to hear the city council report.
Thank you, Chairman Faulkner. I appreciate your indulgence with regard to the moving of that commissioner training so that we can continue to have that and then adjourn right after the commissioner training. That would still give the ability for some of the senior members of the commission who have seen the presentation the opportunity to leave based upon prior commitments. I do anticipate we'll have about 30 minutes worth of time for the commissioner training. That will be dependent upon additional questions that might come in. In order to give the city council report, since our last Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, we have had 1 city council session which occurred on March 12th, 2018. At that time, there were only 2 items of particular concern under new business that I would have identified for the Planning and Zoning Commission's interest. The first is the extension of the North Cass Plaza preliminary plat. It would have expired relatively soon. We have granted a 1-year extension to that, or will be granting, approved the first reading for that extension. The other item that I would point out, and this is more of a citizen interest, was discharge of fireworks on June 30th, 2018. The staff is making preparations for this year's annual 4th of July celebration, the Spirit of America celebration. The City Council is seeking, Parks and Rec are seeking approval for the discharge of fireworks to occur on June 30th, 2018, which I believe is the Saturday before the 4th of July. So mark your calendars and prepare accordingly. Those are the 2 items I have from the City Council report that might be of interest. I would obviously open it up to Mr. Carteret and Mayor Turnbow, who were also present, if there's any additional information they think was important from those meetings.
Any comments? Not for now? Okay, we can move on to staff report. Mr. Carteret and Mr. Gress.
Thank you, sir. Just 2 items this evening. Looking at our schedule, the next meeting on our schedule would be April 3rd. That is a election day. And the council chambers here is still utilized as a polling location, so we do not have that on our calendar. That meeting will not be held by the commission.
Right.
So our next meeting will be April 17th. We will have a meeting. On our agenda will be the annual review of our growth management plan, which will be a public hearing. So that's our current calendar of meetings. Second item, I meant to and didn't remind a few commissioners that expressed interest on the conference of the pending deadline. So we still have that open, but we have to make that decision by the end of Thursday so we can get registrations completed.
So I'm trying to remember.
It's on me, and I cannot make it, so I don't know if
Okay, so who was our second?
Commissioner Armstrong.
Yeah. Well, okay, so the preference, at least from my vantage point, was a commissioner who has not previously attended one of these annual conferences would get first dibs and, you know, fight to the death, but it looks like you've already rolled over.
I've rolled over, and Commissioner Armstrong, please,
So
please.
were there any other commissioners that had not attended an annual conference who wished to attend this year? And I don't remember that they're. Right. I think Commissioner Armstrong is the only one. So you're in line, you're top of the list if you'd like to go. If you can't, then we'll go to our emergency spare backup commissioner, sorry, who was more than willing to go, because I always want a commissioner to take advantage of the opportunity. But we'll graciously forego this opportunity in favor of a commissioner who's not been.
Thank you kindly.
And it's a dirty job, but somebody's got to keep an eye on these two. Yeah, good luck with that. You've got so many different paths or potential things. You may not see each other for most of a day, right?
That's probably once is all we'll see each other. That's what happened with several of the commissioners.
Yeah.
So-
What do they call those, what I'm trying to call tracks? Thank you. That's the word I was fishing for. Thanks.
So,
Okay.
thank you. Very good. That's it for my report.
Okay.
See if Mr. Rokos
Mr.
has any
Rokos?
items.
We have a few projects going on. This Thursday, we'll be opening up bids for our annual curb project. We have issued a notice to proceed for Johnson Drive to have that project go under construction. Our I&I project is moving along nicely and quickly. Fox Ridge, which was started last year, which was halted because of the winter. Hopefully, if it dries out, it was supposed to start Monday, but because of the rain, it was unable to get started again. But hopefully, the next day or two, the ground will dry out enough, we can get that project going again. And the 155th Street culvert is out to bid, and 2 weeks from Thursday, we'll be opening bids on that project. And that's my staff report for tonight.
Thank you. I'll open, yeah, of course. Commissioner Boyd.
What's happening, maybe it's just oversight on my part, or I just forgot, but what's going on down there by the new, off I-49, the new exit right there?
North Cass Parkway?
Yeah, North Cass Parkway. What's taking place over there? It looks like the area of Stonegate.
Oh, the Meadowwood subdivision?
Yeah.
That's where our construction project for Fox Ridge is being constructing a road from Dean
Okay.
to the east there.
Gotcha, okay.
So
Sorry,
that's
I just-
city. That's city managing that project?
Well, yes.
City as opposed to a developer working?
The developer is building the road under city inspection.
Both, okay, thank you. Yep. Okay, I was going to open the floor to the public. Seeing no public, we'll move on to commission member comment. Vice Chair Pfizer.
No comment.
She does that so well. Commissioner Wiggins.
No comment this evening, thank you.
Commissioner Crane.
No comment.
Commissioner Armstrong.
I know there was some clarification on the status of the bridge on 150th last time and then over the week, and I wanted to follow up on that. My understanding is there's been some change in the design for that.
The current bridge, the current situation is there's a bridge at that location. The original idea was to replace it with another bridge. However, we also looked at replacing it with just a double box culvert. Double box culvert is cheaper and easier to install, and so that was the direction it went, and so that's what we're building.
Appreciate that follow-up. I have a budding civil engineer, and she was asking what the flow rate for that has been set at. Do you know, or would that information be available? Thank you.
Dr. Armstrong, I thought I sent you that memo with the flow rates.
Apologies. You may
via
have sent it.
email.
I didn't receive it.
Okay, I'll resend it, but I did send you that because I had them prepare a report, and I had a written report on that.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay.
I was hoping that you'd
didn't-
received it by now.
I will look again. It may have gotten buried. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
All right.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Let's see, Commissioner Arkia.
I just want to thank you guys for going back and redoing this so that it was a little easier for us to recommend for approval for the city. Appreciate your hard work on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Meiske?
Ditto.
Okay. And let's see. Well, we're going to do this in a little different order, but Mayor Turnbow.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to welcome Matt to the group last month because I was absent, and glad to have you on board, and thank you for committing to this. I appreciated everything you did for the Charter Commission, and I'm sure you'll be a great member for this group as well. Thank you. That's all I have, sir.
Yeah, okay. Commissioner Bowie.
Nothing in particular, but I do want to say that I went down, I know this is not part of us, but I went down School Road for the first time in about a good year almost, believe it or not.
Culture
Yeah.
shock.
Yeah, and it's nice. Just wanted to kind of put that plug in. I know it's not us, but it's still a part of our city, and I think it looks really good, real big. I remember my son had a car wreck back in 2006 on School Road when it was real narrow and hard to get around. It was wintry day, it was slippery. So it looks real nice as far as a connection to our city. So, but otherwise, thank you all. And that's about all I have.
Yeah. Thanks to staff, Mr. Grass, Mr. Cataract, Mr. Zur, Mr. Rokas. As always, we could not do this job without you, and we appreciate your support. And so let's see, Mr. Zur, you really don't want me to adjourn, so I will graciously allow the first 4 people to get to the door to make a run for it.
Yes, that's going to be me.
Okay. And the rest of us kids get to stay and get a refresher training from Mr. Zur.
Always a good refresher.
All right.
Thank you. We have maintained 5.
It's getting pretty slim, isn't it?
We have maintained 5.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, and our next to last agenda item is now Commissioner Training, Mr. Zur, so
Thank you, Chairman
when you're
Faulkner.
ready.
I appreciate, again, this evening, you allowing me the opportunity to kind of control your agenda a little bit and adjust it. I know that the desire was to meet in a separate room, but I do feel like it's important for public to be able to see the presentation as well if they're inclined to do so online. This is the Planning and Zoning Commission training. We've done this on a number of different occasions. I was looking back through my materials, though. It looks like we haven't done it since about late 2016, early 2017. So we're going on about a year's worth of time now since the last time we did a commission member training. Again, I will do my best not to bore you, and I will fail miserably at doing that, just so you all are aware. I have about 25 different slides that we're going to work through this evening, and I will try to highlight the big points on each one of the slides. I'm not going to try and regurgitate all of the language that's on them. Commission members, if you're interested, we can get you copies of the slides, and they'll be available, obviously. You'll see them up top, but I'm going to point out some of the highlights for you, and if you've got questions as we go. You can't see them yet. Thank you. Well, that will stop me already.
One screen, but
And Mr. Zur, I'll ask while we're getting the video up, are there many changes in the legal community here within the last year or so?
There are not that are going to dramatically impact this evening's conversation.
All right, good to know.
A lot of examples that I will be able to give you from the past year perhaps, but not so much as far as alterations in what I'm going to be presenting. Your commission charges have stayed the same. Nothing changed under the terms of the Charter Review Commission as it relates to the Planning and Zoning Commission, so all of that will remain the same.
Good, thank you.
Composition. This is kind of a easy overview, basic information, just the facts of the Planning and Zoning Commission. This evening we had all 9 members present, at least for a little while of our discussion. 2 from each ward, plus the mayor or a council member. Mayor, we're honored to have you join us and continue to join us this evening. The mayor has made it a point, I think, since he became mayor to serve on this commission and represent the council on this commission. His advice and input throughout the term of his time on the commission has always been valuable. You serve for a 4-year period of time unless, of course, you're removed or you resign. You can be removed for cause. That cause needs to be stated in writing. We would give you an opportunity for a public hearing to state your case on why you should continue to remain on, or if the cause is scrupulous or inaccurate, giving you the opportunity to present your case during the course of a public hearing. You can be removed without a public hearing, without cause, for neglect of duty. So that would be, I'm sorry, that's not right. You would still have it for cause. It would be for neglect of duty if you fail to attend 3 meetings unexcused over a 12-month period of time. If you're looking for an excuse, please contact Chairman Faulkner or one of the members of staff so that we can present that during the course of the meeting for an excused absence.
And it's always good to notify staff first, because one of our cardinal rules is try to make sure we have a quorum so we can conduct business.
That's right.
And if we know someone is missing, we can make special effort to make sure that we still have a quorum. Thank you, Mr. Zur.
That's correct. Thank you very much. And I welcome the input and questions throughout, so stop me as we go. Chairman Faulkner, you've been doing this in quite a while as well, and you know how the system works, so absolutely bump in order to educate.
I think
this is your commission.
Said I've been giving you a hard time for a long time. Thank you, Mr. Zur.
Chairman Faulkner has attempted on multiple occasions to make me another voting member of this commission.
Oh, yes, Commissioner
Zur. Meetings, you have a quorum requirement, majority of the members of the commission, which we currently still have at this time. 5 of you represent a quorum for purposes of committing any action. An action would require a majority of the full commission, so even if we only have 6 individuals here, if we've got a public hearing or an action that needs to be taken that would recommend to the city council, that would require a vote of 5 individual members from the commission. When we have applicants come in with items and it looks like it's going to be close with regard to our quorum requirements, staff will generally pull the applicants aside before the meeting and advise them, hey, look, you're going to be required to have a majority of at least 5 individuals here. It's not a majority of those present. And we give the applicants kind of an opportunity to say, yeah, let's go forward, or no, let's hold off, and we can perhaps continue the matter to a time when we have a full commission present. But staff is usually pretty good about giving a heads up to the commission, to the applicants when they come in for that kind of idea. Okay? Items that will be governing, that you will govern the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I've underlined one of them here as an important one for you to consider. Bylaws adopted by the commission, obviously. We have our Robert's Rules of Order, which I always carry around with me. I carry a thick one, so whether I can find the answer quickly is a different question as opposed to whether or not I've got the answer available. We have the Missouri Sunshine Law, which is referenced up there. We've got City Code. In our regard, we deal mostly with the UDC, and you will see that in front of most everyone here this evening. I've got mine still in my bag, though. We do have an order of business that's been adopted by way of the UDC. We have adjusted that slightly this evening, and that you'll see that order of business be pretty consistent on all of our Planning and Zoning Commission agendas. And the one that I want to point out, which is underlined here, is self-control. And I would simply note for you, you're going to have the opportunity to perhaps drive by locations in and around the city. You'll have the opportunity to potentially discuss applications with property owners. I've got further instructions on down below with regard to discussions with the property owners or with the applicants. But mostly what I would tell you is self-control is don't say anything during the course of a commission meeting or any discussions with property owners that you wouldn't want either read back to you in court or to see in the local newspaper. Okay? So, any questions about that? Powers. This is a relatively thick slide here. I'll point out a couple of them. If you're interested in what all of your powers are, those are located under section 465.020 1 through section subsection 18. In particular, you have the power to hold public meetings. You have the power to make recommendations to the City Council, much as you did this evening. You have the opportunity to hear appeals from subdivision requirements. You have site plans and conditional use permits that will be presented to you. Growth management plan. We will be doing that on April 17th. It's the annual review of the growth management plan, which will entail a public hearing. So that's one of your other job duties and responsibilities. You can request staff research. So very similar to tonight, Commission requested that staff go back and do additional research with regard to the accessory and detached use structures. We did that at the last go-around and brought it back to you for further consideration this evening. I know that in the past the Commission has requested that we evaluate things such as chickens and maintaining of fowl on properties within the community as well. So those are areas where Commission members have requested that we do the research, and we are happy to do that on behalf of the Commission. We provide the opportunity to study ordinances to improve the public health, safety, and general welfare. You consider the public comments and testimony at any of your public hearings whenever we do have the opportunity to have public present, and you represent the citizenry of Raymore in any development projects. And again, I've got down there the last one, protecting the public health, safety, and welfare from potential negative impacts of new development. I don't have negative in there, but that would be the what you're looking at there. With regard to public hearings, I would note a couple of things on there. You're going to have public hearings for zoning map and text amendments. You'll have public hearings for conditional uses. You'll have public hearings for planned unit developments, preliminary plats, easements and right-of-way vacations, final plats, and then the adoption of special plans. And in this one, I'd note for you that the Old Town of Raymore has a special overlay district and plan on top of it that came before the Commission first for their review and evaluation, basically development procedures taking into account the nature of Old Town and its historic character. So those are many of the things that are included within the powers. Public comment and testimony. Again, you're here to take public comment and testimony during the course of the proceedings. If you have the opportunity to speak with the public outside regarding an upcoming application, my request for you from a legal standpoint is to make sure and note those on the record. Hey, when I was out driving past the property, I stopped, I got out, I looked at it and what it was going to mean with the neighboring property owners, and I had 2 neighbors walk up to me and talk to me during that time. My comment to you on that is listen more than you speak. Don't make a commitment at any given point prior to the vote actually occurring on any application. When you have testimony come in or when you have received information, reporting back to this Commission is very important. I had the opportunity to meet with 2 of the neighbors out there who expressed some concerns. Those concerns were as follows. You can express those, but be very careful about not testifying for those neighbors as well. Okay? If they come up to you, say, I appreciate the input you've provided, it would be very good for you to provide that input to the entirety of the Commission for their evaluation. Come and see the actual hearing or come to the actual presentation on whatever night. That's all very good things for you to be able to provide to neighboring property owners so that the full Commission can hear their testimony during the course of a public hearing.
Right. And I don't mean to steal your thunder, it may be on a later slide, but should a citizen find themselves in a position where they aren't able to attend a meeting, make public testimony, they can certainly submit their position in writing to Community Development Director.
Absolutely correct.
And it will become part of the hearing, part of the minutes, correct?
And we have been pretty good about passing those out and noting anyone who's had objections with regard to it. In fact, we usually will do that as part of our staff report, whether or not we've heard any communication objections or otherwise. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Is there a prohibition against soliciting input?
not a prohibition, though what I would suggest to you is if you're going to take that input or if you're going to solicit it, if you get that input back, invite them to come in order to provide it again before the full commission. Hey, that's really good information that you've provided. Hey, I've got a question regarding this. And that's a really good answer you provided. It would be great if you were able to come in order to provide that during the course of the hearing. The more we get on the record, the better it is for you as commission members who need to make the record for purposes of potential appeal. Okay? Okay. Planning, zoning, and development review. Now, I've broken the next couple of slides down into specific areas. Planning. What you need to understand about planning is the ends. Planning is what you want to see your city look like. Zoning is going to be the means by where you get to that plan ultimately. Okay? Zoning and planning itself is not what I would call a hard and fast set of rules and regulations. It's setting out what we foresee, what we would like to foresee in the future of actually occurring here. Doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to happen because the city can change. Areas and properties can change, which would justify alterations in zoning that would come before you as commission members. Okay? Generally, planning is broad, long-range, policy, periodic, review. That's your growth management plan that we're going to be talking about on April 17th. The planning is a statement of policy prepared as a guide to the future, and it's important to understand what you're going to get here. The comprehensive plan or the growth management plan does not have the force of law. It is a guidebook for you to utilize. It's a very important guidebook because we're going to include within all of our staff reports references. Hey, this application is compliant with the growth management plan, or alternatively, this application doesn't comply with the growth management plan for the following reasons, which you should take into consideration. Okay? Or it doesn't comply with the growth management plan, but there are factors from surrounding properties that might justify altering from the original growth management plan. Okay? Any questions about that? Okay. Next slide. Now on to zoning. Zoning and development review. So zoning is how you actually get to the end of your planning. In particular, I'm going to point out a couple of things on here. First and foremost, when we are doing zoning changes, zoning applications, zoning is related to specific, narrow, and immediate regulations of individual properties. We are changing from an agricultural zoning designation to an R1 zoning designation as to that particular property. Okay? That's your zoning application. It's one of the tools in your tool bag. It impacts on particular properties, and it is a locally enacted zoning regulation or control over the use of private property. It is one of your police powers as part of the city, and it's going to be one of your authorities or one of your authorities that you have under a legislative authority. Now, you're going to hear me comment a couple of times this evening on legislative versus administrative in nature. When I use the terminology of legislative authority, that's going to mean that you have broad discretion with regard to approval of particular items. Okay? It means that if it's challenged in a court of law, that broad discretion, the court is going to impose a standard on a legislative decision, which will say, hey, we're not going to overturn this unless it's arbitrary, unreasonable, and not supported by the record presented. Again, importance of noting the record here. Any time that we're able to bolster a record with regard to a commission action, the better, because it gives more support to the notion of not overturning that commission action. Okay? Arbitrary, unreasonable, not supported by the record. Again, zoning ordinances are the force of law, so it is what the community plan is at work. Your plan does not carry the force of law, zoning does carry the force of law. And zoning is what you get, planning is what you want. On subpoint 4 up there, I'd point out the discretion of the commission. Again, the governmental body has great latitude in this regard. And I noted again, the overturning a rezoning decision is unreasonable, arbitrary, and not supported by the record. And again, I've talked a little bit about creating your record as often as possible. If you're going to vote against a particular zoning application, or you feel you're going against what the majority of the individuals on the commission are doing, let it be known. Make sure you voice why you intend, or why, hey, after hearing all of this evidence, I don't feel like they've met the burdens for establishing this type of zoning here. That's all very helpful for purposes of creating a record. Okay? Any questions? Next. Okay, very simple slide here in case you haven't seen it yet. This is the official zoning map for the city of Raymore, Missouri. I know you can't see whatever particular properties are on that map, but this is really your plan at work. This is where the city has made the determination that, hey, some properties are better for commercial use and some properties are better for residential. Some properties are good for agricultural. If you haven't seen this, we're happy to provide a copy to you at any given time.
And it's on the website.
And it's on the website. Flipping on through, development review. It's the next slide with regard to Planning and Zoning Commission. Again, development review is going to be reviewing particular items, conditional use permits, rezoning map amendment, text amendments, those types of things. Development review includes special uses, planned unit developments, minor subdivision plats, and Commissioner Armstrong, I would go back. You had a couple of questions at the last Planning and Zoning Commission meeting about, hey, we've got some lots here where we've got an accessory or detached dwelling unit on the property. Staff was, in many regards, from my position, I was thinking in terms of minor developments, minor subdivision plats, so you can break a lot into two separate lots in that particular regard, get two separate mailing addresses. That kind of cleans that one up, makes it separate from a detached accessory dwelling unit. So that's one of the options that we already have under the terms of our UDC, which would be the minor subdivision plats. Preliminary subdivision plats, final subdivision plats, zoning certification, sign permits, site plan review, vacations of streets, interpretations, and administrative adjustments are all development review. Now, in development review, what you're dealing with here is a ministerial or administrative application of the zoning requirements, and this is going to be an administrative decision. It's far less latitude than you have with a legislative decision. So your administrative decision, your goal there is, okay, we've got a bunch of check mark boxes, and if we get to the bottom of the check mark boxes, even if I don't like it, if it complies with all the check marks, you really don't have a whole lot of latitude to vote against it. Okay? Make sense? Less latitude. Basically, you're not going to be able to either arbitrarily or subjectively grant or deny particular items. For example, plats is one particular one that we've got. State of Missouri versus Schaefer versus Cleveland has gone into great detail as one of the cases out there for we can't deny a plat just because we don't like what's going on around it. If it complies with many of the things that are required under our terms of our UDC, it's going to be very hard to deny the plat. You can have some input with regard to those discussions. I would note for you that most of the time what you're going to find in the staff's applications and the staff reports are going to be your findings of fact, and I would impress upon you the need to continue to go back and look at those during the course of the discussions and prior to the meetings. So when you go out and if you're actually going to drive past one of the properties, go out, drive past the property and pull out those findings of fact and look, is it going to be a negative impact on the following reasons? The staff has done an excellent job. Mr. Gress, Mr. Catarat will always include, these are the factors that we're going to be considering in the upcoming applications. Okay? Any questions about that?
I would say it's fairly rare that commission does not agree with staff, but it's not unheard of, and your fine print there, if we don't agree, we can propose other findings of fact, and those will become part of the record.
Absolutely correct, and we invite that opportunity to have that discussion with you as well, too. Yes. Findings of fact, and during the course of a hearing, if you're going to go in a different direction, we would request that you provide some information as to why you're not going to find those findings of fact. Hey, finding 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 have not been met. Findings 6 through 8 have been met. Or I have the following findings. Okay? Okay, development review procedures. This is pulled directly out of section 470, and again, these are all of the things that you would potentially see in a development review side of this. At the bottom, you're going to see a little key there which says recommendations. That's the commission working for making recommendations to the city council. Or D is you're the deciding factor with regard to a particular application. Or, hey, where's the appellate authority under here? Who has the appeal? Many of those are going to be appeals to the city council or appeals to the Board of Zoning Adjustment. And then, of course, you've got your last provision in there which talks about all of those items that would require a public hearing for consideration. Again, just pulled directly from the UDC. We talked about legislative versus administrative discretion here. I'm not going to go in too much detail with regard to this particular side. Again, note zoning and rezoning, master plan amendment, and preliminary site plans will all provide you with legislative actions. If it's going to be appealed from a legal standpoint, I'm going to have to be able to prove to the court that it was not contrary to the overwhelming weight of the evidence. So that's one of the standards that we're going to have. So if I've got 75 people that all walk in and tell you the application is bad for the same reason, and I have one person that walks up and says it's great, that might be a difficult thing for me to overcome as the overwhelming weight of the evidence. Again, arbitrary, capricious, bad faith, those are the terms used by most of the courts when it comes to evaluating an arbitrary action taken or a legislative action being overturned. Okay. Let's see. So I will quote to you directly from one of the cases regarding this particular item. Back in 1998, quoting the Summit Ridge Development Company versus the City of Independence, if a decision bears no substantial relationship to the public health, safety, morals, or general welfare, this court will consider arbitrary and unreasonable. Zoning ordinances are presumed valid, and uncertainty about the reasonableness of a zoning regulation must be resolved in the government's favor. So you have broad discretion here, but here's where you can't cross into. Make sense? And if you're wondering about a particular action, feel free to stop during the course of the meeting. Mr. Zur, are we viewing this from an administrative standpoint? Do we have broad legislative discretion here? Or is this something that we are looking at simply from a ministerial administrative review process? Happy to provide that input during the course of the meeting if you're questioning. Okay? Kind of awkward, but happy to provide that input. Administrative actions. Again, less latitude here, and I've got my quotation about halfway down the page, just the facts, ma'am. So if you've got your check mark boxes, these are what we have to prove in order to be able to approve a final site plan. Most of the time, your final site plans are going to be based solely upon, for example, is it substantially compliant with the preliminary site plan presented? If it's substantially similar to the preliminary site plan submitted, you have less latitude in denying that final site plan. Does that make sense? Okay. Examples of administrative actions include preliminary and final plat approval, special use, conditional use permits, variances. Again, variances are going to be very much a check mark box. We have 9 categories in terms of the UDC for where you're going to receive a variance, and those need to be check marked off. Okay. You do have some discretion with regard to these, but they cannot be overly burdensome or onerous. Really hard to be able to make a distinction within there. So most of the time, if you're going to have an administrative review, ask me beforehand, hey, you know, I have some concerns with this. Is this a factor that's a relevant factor for us to consider in review of this item? Okay. Most common actions. This has nothing to do with planning and zoning. I have inserted this slide simply to break up the monotony of all of the words that you saw on the previous 5 slides.
Great.
Most common actions that you're going to see are going to be zoning actions, and I'll break these down real quickly. Again, broad legislative discretion. Section 470.020 of the UDO will control this. There are limitations, and there are legal protests. If a legal protest is presented before this commission, we will let you know. A legal protest has been provided. A legal protest basically would come from the city council level and require a supermajority vote for approval of any particular action. Noting on here, you guys can consider all kinds of things for public health, safety, and welfare. One of the things that you can't consider, however, is tax revenues. Hey, this proposed application is going to produce X number of millions of dollars of tax revenue for the city. Not necessarily a planning and zoning. You guys are here talking about the use of the property, the land use of the property, public health, safety, and welfare. Hey, look, is it going to have a spikes set up all around the outside of the perimeter of the property for protective services? Well, no, that's not an acceptable thing for them to be able to do. However, the tax issues are more of the council level determination. That's a policy with regard to tax revenues, sales tax return, what this means for the community as a whole, not necessarily a planning and zoning commission consideration. So if an applicant comes in before you and says, we're going to install whatever these wonderful things are, and by the way, it's also going to produce X number of millions of dollars of tax dollars, that is not an area that you guys need to have any concern with. Thank you very much for that information. Please present that to the city council because that's where they're going to be interested. Okay? Questions about this one?
So taxes aren't considered part of the welfare of the city?
From a Planning and Zoning Commission standpoint, no, we can't go into that one. So I would caution you on utilizing that as one of your factors. You're not going to ever see that tax revenue as an item within our findings of fact. City Council can. Okay. Legal protests need to be presented to the clerk, 30% of the land within 185 feet, and it would require the council to vote on any particular item by 2/3 of its members for approval. And here we've broken down the zoning factors, so you can see them, and I'm not going to read them all out for you, because again, these are all going to be included within the terms of your staff reports when you receive them. Comprehensive plan or growth management plan is one of them. Overcrowding is one of them. You can consider the character of the district, the suitability for a particular use, and conserving values of buildings and encouraging the most appropriate land use. This is all coming directly from statute and from the Unified Development Code that we've established here in Missouri. Case law may also control certain factors, and if there is case law on a particular type of application, I will provide that to you as part of any staff report, as part of any discussion. And if you've got questions regarding impact and whether or not it's a factor for you to consider, please feel free to stop during the course of the meeting and ask me specifically. So financial considerations are generally not a concern for the commission, but of the council. That came from the last one. The next one will probably be more helpful for you. This is a couple of examples from case law. So factors that you can consider: adaptability of the property to the permitted use. There's the case for justification for serving a public interest, which outweighs the detriment to private interests. Existing uses and conditions of the area, if there's adequate infrastructure and governmental services, and whether or not it's compliant with the comprehensive plan within your community. Those are all factors that are drawn from case law that are acceptable for you to take into consideration. So even if you've got a number of neighbors who come in and complain about it, but you see, hey, there's real benefit to our community for other reasons, it might well be a justifiable reason for you to be able to vote in favor of that, but one I would want you guys to make sure and create your record on. Okay? Make sense? The next one is improper factors. Pay special attention here. Adequate provisions of schools, not a proper factor according to case law. Prevention of competition, absolutely not a factor for the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider. Just because we have a large grocery store chain coming in with an application doesn't mean you can vote against that large grocery store application because you've got an affinity for the local mom and pop store that's already here. Okay? Those are things that you can't consider for it. Regulation of competition, prevention of competition, kind of run one and the same, though the courts make that distinction. Yes?
Can you clarify the meaning of adequate provision of schools?
Yes. So, for example, if you are talking about the school district needs to keep up with the number of students within it. So if the notion is coming before you, hey, we've got an application here for multifamily use, and multifamily use is designated as part of the comprehensive plan in this location, it's going to bring in X number of children. Individuals come forward and say, we've got real concern about how we're going to fit them into our schools. At the end of the day, that's not one of the areas that you're going to stay focused on. The school district needs to make arrangements for those, not a Planning and Zoning Commission concern. Comprehensive plan amendment. Comprehensive, oh, I went a little bit too far there. So comprehensive plan amendment. This is going to be your annual review. Again, you're going to be doing this April 17th, so it's coming up relatively quickly. It is purely a legislative action which provides you with broad discretion. I would note most of the time we're not going to see a whole lot of changes with our comprehensive plan. I know we do it on an annual basis. We do make the reviews. We do make alterations and recommendations. But again, it doesn't change dramatically over an extended period of time. This is, of course, the general guide. It's not binding. It's always great if I'm an attorney that walks in with an application, not here, but other locations. If I'm an attorney that walks in with an application, I can say right off the bat that my proposed application complies with the comprehensive plan. I got to step up in the world already. Okay. Otherwise, I'm having to fight overcoming the city's prior planning anticipated goals in this particular area. Planning and subdivision. Okay. Preliminary plats. Preliminary plats need to be considered within 60 days of their receipt. That's more of the Community Development Department's concern. This is an administrative determination. Again, less latitude, less discretion. And there are 4 factors that would go into the determination for a preliminary plat, including the adverse effect on neighboring properties, compliance with the UDO and the growth management plan, and any other city regulations, the undue burdens on the public services and facilities, and adequate provision for additional road, street, and sewer demands. So those are the 4 factors. And again, those will be outlined within the course of your documentation whenever you receive the applications. You've got options here. Denial. If you're going to deny it, please provide the written information within 10 days for why it was denied. Again, we're building our record for that. Approval or approval with certain conditions, and you guys can discuss those conditions that get presented to the applicant. Okay. Final plat approval, again, another administrative item for you, less legislative discretion than otherwise. 3 factors that go into this. Are they substantially the same as the approved preliminary plat? Again, we talked about that a little bit. Does it comply with all the conditions and restrictions of the code, and does it comply with any conditions that were attached with the preliminary plat? That has to be done within a 30-day time frame. And it can be done as part of a site review plan as processed as well too. So if they come in for a platting and they also have a site plan that says, okay, we're going to plat it for commercial use, and we're going to change it from agricultural use to commercial use, and here's our site plan at the same time for a Taco Bell to go on to it, those can be done at the same time as a one step in Raymore. Okay. Let's see, site plan review, you'll see these on a regular basis. This would be individual property that's going to be coming in with a particular type of use on the property. You guys will control signage, you'll control the use of the property, access, ingress, egress, those types of things. And then amendments of the site plan also come before you as administrative approval. Okay, shifting gears. Now we're a little bit beyond that. Again, breaking up the monotony of the words here. Couple of things for you to consider as council members. First and foremost, conflicts of interest. If an application comes before you by a family member or by an individual or an entity that you are a part of where you will gain some pecuniary income increase or benefit, you have a conflict of interest, and I would recommend to you that you recuse yourself from any determinations or considerations of the application. If you've got a question about it, please talk with me in advance. You're going to get your applications, you're going to see them, you're going to know. Recusing yourself of any discussion on it is an easy process, and I'm happy to walk you through it. Okay. Conflicts of interest for financial interest, it's an automatic conflict if it's a substantial private interest or a relationship, or if you receive a salary from the applicant in excess of $5,000. Commissioner Crane, I believe, used to work for a local restaurant which may have presented, if they had come into the city for an application, he would have had to recuse himself. I don't think that we've had very many recusals since I've been involved. Chairman Faulkner, can you recall?
We've had a few.
Yeah.
May go back to
many of those times, I think those recusals were, though, based upon the fact that the individual members were within 185 feet of the property and felt like it was uncomfortable for them to make a decision since they butted up onto the property.
Right.
Okay. So for financial purposes, $5,000 is an automatic. Otherwise, you can talk with the attorney about it, and I'm happy to provide you with that interest. Okay. Conflicts continued. You can't receive payments in condition of official duty, so don't receive a check from any applicant prior to any vote or after any vote, if I can be so bold. Use or disclosure of confidential information. If you come into confidential information during the course of your time as a commission member, you can't sell that confidential information, at least not the last time I checked. Favorable actions or matters providing a special monetary benefit to your family or to you. So if your property values would increase, I can't really say that's a direct pecuniary benefit to you. You might have a property that's going to be developed. Now, if you were the owner of a property that's going to be sold and developed for commercial purposes, absolutely a conflict of interest that you're going to want to recuse yourself from. If your uncle has a property, another similar situation, it's a family member that you need to disclose the conflict. And you can't use your decision-making authority to obtain a financial gain or to enrich yourself or family through coercion. Hey, if you give me X number of dollars, I will vote in favor of this. So don't do any of those things. Sure way to get booted off of this particular commission for cause. after a public hearing. I'm not going to go through and read to you each one of the Missouri statutes on conflicts of interest. I would simply note for you, if you are interested or concerned, Section 105.454 of the revised statutes of Missouri outlines all of the provisions for when you can and cannot have a conflict of interest. This is the $500 or less rule. So, once you leave the Planning and Zoning Commission, yes? I'm sorry. Once you leave the Planning and Zoning Commission, if you have the opportunity to come back before as a representative and applicant, you could not do so within a one-year time frame after your termination of service on the Planning and Zoning Commission. Rulemaking, if you attempt to influence a decision while you're on the board or the commission, if you perform any service for compensation, or if you perform any service within 1 year of termination for an application that comes before the board. You can't do any of those items. And again, I provide the statutory provisions for this under Section 105. This is a very protective section, but it's not going to provide you very much fun or pecuniary interest. Anything that would result in your assistance. So if you're going to help out great-grandpa with an application, you can't do that as well. Okay. For my purposes, this is the most important slide when it comes to conflicts of interest. And this is with the process. If you call me up and say, Mr. Zur, I've got a problem, I've got an upcoming application, I've got some questions and concerns with, I'm going to pull this slide out and we're going to walk through this slide on a step-by-step basis to make a determination on whether or not there is a conflict of interest. And I will tell you that first and foremost, we're going to decide, hey, look, is there a direct financial impact for you, your spouse, or a dependent? Have you performed any service during an employment for an individual that's going to be coming before the commission? Do you have any business which is associated or knowingly performed any service? Again, I'm going to note in here, am I acting on a legislative or administrative basis? If you're acting on a legislative basis, which provides broad discretion, I might have more concern with regard to your potential conflict of interest as opposed to its administrative. I don't have any option. If I check mark the boxes, it's a done deal. I'd still probably request or suggest that you make note of it. Has an oral or written communication occurred which needs to be disclosed or preserved for procedural due process rights? This would be more of your discussions outside of the meeting. The last thing I want is for a member of my commission to come back in or to be quoted in the press afterwards as saying, hey, I went out to the property, this is a slam dunk, it's a sure thing, there's no way in the world I'm not going to vote for this. Wait until the hearing occurs, wait until all the evidence is in. Okay? Okay. Again, shifting gears, and I had this slide in here specifically for Commissioner Crane.
Yeah.
That's correct. This is my ode to Commissioner Crane. It is a 1966 Shelby Cobra 427 Super Snake, made history on January 21st, 2007 by fetching $5.5 million at the Barrett-Jackson Collector Car Auction.
Wow.
800 horsepower sports car, was one of just 2 produced and was used as the personal transportation for famed racer and performance car builder Carroll Shelby.
Ah, sweet.
So, again, breaking up the monotony. And we're getting close, guys, I promise. Ex parte communications, you have already heard me talk about these this evening. You've gone to the site. Your neighbors walk up to you. They are carrying pitchforks and signs saying, we don't want this development next door. Let me bend your ear as much as possible before the commission meeting, okay? During the course of your discussions with them, and I think I will have covered most of these, but I want to cover them again. Guidelines, limit the time of your discussions. Tell them to come in and present it to the full commission. Ask questions. Again, this is your questioning and your investigation, but refrain from giving much feedback. Thank you very much for the answer. I appreciate taking that into consideration. If you're able to present that to the full commission, I'm sure they'd be interested in that information. Disclaimer, hey, I have not made any decision. I'm not going to decide until after the public hearing on this matter and all the evidence is in. Do not take free lunches. Do not take apple pie, do not take cookies, do not take rides to and from the site, things like that. Make written notes of the meeting at the time or right after the meeting so that you have them fresh in your mind and you're not misstating anything that's been provided to you, and because you're going to come back in and say, I had an opportunity to meet. Well, what was his name or her name? Well, it was the owner of the property at this location. I've got my notes here on it. I'm happy to share my notes with the members of this commission. Okay. Disclose during the course of the meeting. Make sure you disclose. I had a conversation with neighboring property owners, or while I was out there, I ran into the applicant who's looking to build the accessory use structure at the back of his property. He pointed out where it was going to go. He told me how many square feet it was going to be. Okay? And Note in there if you think that your communication outside of the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing is going to be such that you would no longer be able to make an unbiased decision, okay? If while you're out at the site, an applicant comes up and threatens you with physical harm or injury, that might be an item that would keep you from being able to make an unbiased determination or decision, okay? Often there are not going to be bright line rules here, and what I would tell you is be careful if you're going to communicate via email as well. So emails are a discoverable item for it, and we'd want to make sure that you're not communicating back and forth a string of information, making commitments via email. What I would suggest to you is if you're contacted via email, thank them for the email. You're happy to present that to commission for their evaluation, and again, invite them to come to the commission to provide the testimony during the course of it, if they're able to do so. Any questions about ex parte communications?
If they're not able to make it to the meeting, like they email you a question and they can't make it to the meeting, would you then just let them know that you'll present the question for discussion and leave it at that?
Yes, that's exactly what would end up happening, and either me or to any one of the members of the staff.
So should I have them reach out to you then, or?
They are welcome to do so. We always would accept any written correspondence submitted to staff. Those would be presented to the full commission. Okay? Critical issue when facing a claim of prejudgment bias is whether the decision maker's mind is irrevocably closed on a disputed issue. That's the area that I'm going to point out for you. I'm not going to read the second portion of this large citation or this quote for you, but what I want you to understand is the irrevocably closed. When you walk in, you cannot have your mind irrevocably closed to additional testimony coming in. And if you express the notion of, I've made up my decision, I've made up my mind on this application, that is not an application you should be voting on at that point. Okay? And I would note here, the problem with ex parte discussions are basically their prospective impact on decisions outside of the public hearing process where other individuals can question, can refute, can provide additional input on. Okay, shifting gears. This is Bear Lake, Colorado, and Long's Peak in the background. If you have not had the opportunity to visit, I would highly recommend it. It's a wonderful trail around the lake. Sunshine law requirements, and this is my last area of real discussion. If you're at the site and you run into 4 or 5 other members of your Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, I would highly recommend that you wave to each other and immediately turn around and walk away. Don't have the opportunity or the potential for discussing the outcome of a particular case at a particular site when you are all together. This applies particularly to email strings. So for example, if an email string starts off with just 2 individuals on the commission and someone says, I don't know the answer to that, let's ask the rest of the commission members. Once you email that to the rest of the commission members, you have created a sunshineable document that needs to be able to be produced. And again, I would go back and note for you, don't put anything in writing that you don't want to hear read back to you before a court of law or in a local newspaper. Okay? Sunshine law governs the actions of public governmental bodies which are defined as legislative, administrative, or other governmental entities created by the Constitution or statutes of this state or by order or ordinance of the political subdivision or district, as well as judicial entities when operating in an administrative capacity. Sunshine law means majority of the members in receipt of an email, including the resender, equals a public record which needs to be produced and can be produced based upon any sunshine request. So don't attach that to a string from a bunch of other emails that you receive from family members or assorted other associates. My note for you here is, if a member of a public body transmits an email relating to public business to at least 2 other members of the body, so that when counting the sender, a majority of members are copied, a copy of the email shall be sent to either the custodian of records, city clerk, or the member's public office computer. Any such message, subject to the exceptions, shall be considered a public record upon receipt by the custodian or at the public member's computer. So, if you do have an email exchange, which includes a majority of the individuals of this commission, please make sure that that email exchange also includes the city clerk on that discussion. Okay? Any questions? Second to last screen. This is a Actual example, yeah, and it's going to be hard to read for you. I'm sorry. Anyone recognize what you've got back behind there from the How I Came to Love? Dr. Strangelove? There you go. So this is my example. Does the Sunshine Law apply to luncheon meetings of members of a public governmental body where public business is discussed? That's the important factor here, but let's not have too much of a sign of that if we can help it. In the case involving the Kansas City Star versus Shields, a 1989 case, the chairman and 2 members of the Kansas City Council Finance Committee, along with the city manager and the city budget director, held a luncheon meeting without notice in a private dining room of a Kansas City restaurant. The following day, the committee unanimously adopted a budget agreement. This meeting, where public business was discussed, constituted a public meeting and notice should have been posted. Attorney General's opinion number 10-75. So, be careful meeting out in public. Do not discuss anything about the Commission's activities or the Commission's upcoming applications in the public. Yes, sir.
I know on Charter Commission we made a reference to a particular number. Is it limited to the size of the group? So if, for instance, when I was on the Charter Review Commission, Commissioner Wilson and I were both in the neighborhood bowling league together. So we see each other outside of the event, and maybe one in passing you might discuss something. Obviously, Charter Review is a little different than this. However, is there a number defined?
I'm concerned with groups.
Groups.
I'm concerned with groups.
So 3 or more.
That would be my assessment for you of
perfect.
Okay. Technically, you're probably looking at majority, but be very cautious on that. If you can avoid it, do so.
3 or more it is.
Conducting meetings, my second to last slide. Swearing in persons for public hearings, that's more my problem, the Commission's problem. Public comments and questions and how to handle when they are directed at the applicant. Again, Chairman Faulkner has been doing this for a while. He is usually very, very good about this. When we have an applicant come forward, a lot of times they're going to have the tendency of saying, well, just ask the individuals over here if it's going to hurt them, or, hey, let me ask them. Letting the applicant or letting the individual standing here ask the question is not the proper route to go. And so Chairman Faulkner will usually be pretty good about directing them back up to the commission for their consideration. Hey, if I was coming in and I was a disgruntled neighbor, I might come in and appropriately say, members of this commission, I think it would be very important for you to ask the applicant the following 6 very pointed questions about their application. That's the appropriate route to go, rather than while I'm up here, I'm going to grill the applicant while he's sitting in the seat back here. Directing the questions to the commission, keeping it within the commission's control is what I'm looking for there. And I'm obviously happy to help out in that prospect, but had very little issues with that as Chairman Faulkner has manned these meetings. So
it is possible, though.
It is possible. Please make sure to be careful about whether or not you are stating an opinion versus a factual statement. Hey, in my opinion, I don't believe they've met the following provisions for this, or I went out to the property and it's my opinion based upon this. I simply caution you to make sure you're noting that in there. I don't believe. Those are key words to kind of consider when you're making your evaluation of these things. And we don't really have scripted agendas for this particular item other than what we have for our overall agenda each week, or each time that we meet. We would generally go through the process. First and foremost, staff report, open and close the public hearing, allow public comment, allow discussion, allow motion, and then a vote on the same. That's really what we're talking about there. And we've conducted these hearings or these meetings long enough that it's kind of set in stone as to how we go about it. Any alterations that staff will alert you to. And that concludes my presentation for this evening. I am happy to answer any questions you have, but consider yourselves officially trained, and I am happy to provide you with the materials. There will be no test at the conclusion of this other than the every other week test that you will receive from applicants and members of your community.
By far.
Thank you, sir.
Questions, comments, please?
I'll move to adjourn.
Second. Wasted no time. What are we going to do if somebody votes not to? We don't
Second.
consider that. Okay, Commissioner Urquilla, second by Wiggins. Unless there's any discussion, all those in favor of adjournment, raise a hand, please. We have 5 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. Mr. Zur, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
And Mr. Gress, thank you